Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Allied Advisors Podcast, the podcast specifically designed for mid-market manufacturers looking to scale operations and improve that ever-important bottom line. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Steve Cook. Steve is the Executive Managing Director at LFM Capital, a Nashville-based private equity firm built by operators and engineers and known for driving world-class operational excellence across U.S. and Canadian manufacturing companies. A dual MBA and MSEE graduate of MIT's prestigious Leaders for Global Operations program, Steve brings more than 2 decades of hands-on experience leading, transforming, and scaling industrial businesses. At LFM, he plays a central role in investment strategy, portfolio company leadership, and platform building in sectors ranging from electric grid reliability to advanced industrial equipment. Respected for his intellect, humility, and deep commitment to people, Steve is also a dedicated mentor to the MIT Leaders for Global Operations community and a frequent contributor to executive education, including teaching a Harvard Business School case on one of LFM's most challenging deals. His leadership is shaped by a strong sense of purpose and perspective, reinforced by personal experiences that sharpened his focus on what truly matters, and he is known for building enduring partnerships that create meaningful, long-term value. Well, Steve, again, I really appreciate you carving out the time to come and talk with us today. It's a privilege to have you on the show. Thanks.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and as somebody who works in mid-market manufacturing with some private equity-backed businesses, it's super exciting for me to be able to kind of, let's say, get a peek behind the curtain and see how the sausage is made. So it really, again, thank you so much for joining the show. So if you don't mind, we'll dive right in. One of the things that I know sets LFM apart from other, let's say, private equity firms that operate in the mid-market space is how you guys are operating partner led. That's different. I think when most people think of private equity, they think of financial institutions where really the principals and the partners, they're the ones that kind of lead the charge, and then the operating partners are really just there to support. But you guys do that a little bit differently. Can you maybe talk us through what that model looks like and why you go that way as opposed to maybe a more traditional route?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but when I was in my early 40s, I was a plant manager for Dell, and was starting to get a little bit frustrated kind of with the politics and bureaucracy of a bigger company. And my controller pulled me aside and said, you really should think about going into private equity. And I don't know how I got through MIT without ever hearing that phrase. But I said, what is private equity? I literally had never heard it before. And she said, you should Google it. So I went home that night and I did Google it. And I said, wow, this actually seems pretty amazing. And I was incredibly blessed to have an opportunity years later to move into private equity. But I've actually taught classes at business school, or titled like how I stumbled my way into being managing director of a private equity firm. I think in some ways LFM Capital is quite different because we didn't have, I guess, the knowledge of how other people do it. I ended up working for about 4 years at another private equity firm here in town, and then was encouraged by some major university endowments to leave and start my own private equity firm. And so we did that in 2014. And, we really kind of started with a blank slate. And so I guess one major difference I would highlight is that I am an operating partner, and I still am also managing partner of the firm. And I've been told by numerous investors that they're not aware of another private equity firm in the country where that's the case. In most private equity firms, people that have more of a financial background are what's called deal partners, and the deal partners are the ones that lead the firm, and are really, I'd say, from a pecking order, they're like the top, of the firm. And in our firm, I would say there's much more of a parity between the operating partners and the deal partners. So it's much more of a partnership, and the operating partners are involved in deal selection, in due diligence, in every aspect of working with a company we invest in. When we look at a deal on our Monday morning meeting and decide we want to, invest some resources into that deal, we will assign 3 people to a deal: one operating partner, one deal partner, and associate. And so that is also quite different. In most private equity firms, it is all kind of deal people that do the diligence and the selection of deals, and then the operating partner is brought in either right before close or even after close.
Really? So they're not involved at all in the due diligence or the selecting process?
That is most common. I
Wow.
would say there's a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have very, very financially driven private equity firms that I call it painted on private operating partners. They've been told by investors that you need to have these operating partners. I literally would say some of them view it like as a necessary evil. And they, bring in these operating partners just kind of to help, honestly, with fundraising. And they're not really given a lot of respect inside the firm. I would say we're kind of the absolute opposite of that on the spectrum, where there's an operating partner actually leading the firm. And again, it's not like operating partners are the top of the pecking order here. It's more of a parity with deal partners.
I mean, I certainly, so my next question was going to be, what are you guys looking at when you're looking at potential deals in the mid-market manufacturing space? But I'm really curious so in my head, I like to think of myself as a manufacturing guy. And in my head, if I'm looking at purchasing a manufacturing company, I want to know where the opportunities are to add value beyond just a growing market, right? Where are we inefficient on the shop floor where I can carve out some waste and maybe see a 20% increase in output, or, where's the potential to automate? And to me, that only comes from people who have experience working in manufacturing and know how to do those types of things. It's really hard. I guess I'm a little bit shocked. Like, how do you even assess a deal if you don't even look at that? I mean, I get the financial aspect, but it would seem like that would be an important piece, especially for private equity who's looking to add value and then exit on a 5 to 7 year stretch.
Yeah. I completely agree. It is a little shocking to me that, like, kind of how the industry has evolved. One of my running jokes is that 90% of the people that work in private equity think they're in the top 10% of the smartest people that work in private equity. And clearly that math doesn't math.
Right.
But I actually might be underestimating that. I'd love to do an anonymous poll someday. But I think there is quite a bit of arrogance in private equity.
Yeah.
And I would say that, the normal career ladder to work your way into private equity is to get a finance degree from a top university, go join a private equity firm as an associate after doing like 2 years in investment banking. And then you just kind of start climbing your way, up the ladder. And if you think about it, like a lot of their peers that kind of had a similar career path that maybe went into hedge funds or into picking public equities, they view themselves as like really very intelligent stock pickers, you know what I mean? Or seeing kind of around curves and being able to see what the future holds and being able to make an investment that, that pays off because of that. And by no means am I minimizing that. Like, that's very important. But I think a lot of private equity firms view themselves as, instead of being really intelligent picking public equities, we are really intelligent picking private equities. And we are giving our investors exposure to smaller companies and to the private equities, so they have a exposure to the whole market, public and private. And there's, like I said, I don't want to say that that's not important. I mean, making a bad investment, I don't care how good of an operator you are, you're going to hate it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's going to be hard to swim upstream and turn that into a great outcome. And that business case that, that I teach at Harvard about one of our LFM deals, that was definitely a big part of it. Was, I think in hindsight, we would say we would probably not invest in that industry again. It's just a very tough industry, hard to get good margins, not a fun place to operate.
Right.
But that being said, I think the LFM model is, let's be as intelligent as we can about investing in the right industries, and and picking great investments, but add to that an ability to work your way out of maybe an environment that didn't end up the way you hoped it was going to end up. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, we all hope when you make an investment, the EBITDA is just going to up and to the right for the entire time you invest. And that's a great outcome, of course. But
Yeah.
that rarely happens. There's very typical kind of a J curve where things get worse before they get better from an EBITDA point of view, or just some heavy lifting that needs to be done. And then, one thing I would say that we are proud of is that we are incredibly tenacious, and we're very, very team operated, or oriented. And so when an investment is not going, the way we had hoped when we made the investment, we really dig in, and our whole team kind of coalesces around that investment and says, hey, how do we all pitch in? How do we turn this around? What do we need to do 3-4 years, from now to have a great outcome? And so, as a result, we've never had an investment where we lost all our money. We've never had an investment where we didn't pay the banks back 100%. We've only had one investment out of, at this point, I think like almost 60, that we lost any money at all. And so, that tenacity, I think, plays a big part, and it just gives us more tools than a normal, I would say, private equity firm of being able to be in there and be operators. I mean, there's an example where this was really tragic, but I had hired a good friend from my time at Dell. He was CEO of one of our companies. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I was literally the second phone call he made after he called his wife. And of course, he said, like, I also want to spend as much time as I can with my family. And so I jumped in and became CEO of that company, like, overnight. Dan Shockley has done that in situations. Ken Huffling has done that. And so, we have the ability to jump in and play a hardcore operating role if needed. It's not what we want to do. It's not, plan A. That one investment I talked about, where that we lost money, we would actually call that our Apollo 13. It's not the way you want the mission to go, but we got all the astronauts back on the ground. We paid
Right.
off the bank. The company's still operating. The executives were taken care of. Again, not something we're proud of that we lost some money on that investment, but 99% of private equity firms would have thrown the keys at the bank, given where we were facing. And we were able to work our way out and get like 50% of our investment out, which, again, it's not great, but it's a lot better than losing it 100%.
Yeah, but it says something about the character of the company and the values, right?
Absolutely.
That
Yeah. I
you
mean,
do that.
and that's the thing. We really are optimizing for literally like the 50-year time horizon. And, the argument I kind of made to our investors as to why would we keep investing resources and kind of fighting for this company was, look, when we're recruiting executives, it's really important to me to be able to say we've never bankrupted a company. Like, we've
Mhm.
never given up on the executive team. And that is going to be invaluable to us over the long run. When we're talking to banks, the fact that we've never had a bank, lose money on an investment with LFM is super valuable when we're trying to negotiate deals with banks.
Yeah, and from a lean perspective, I mean, it seems like you guys kind of operate with one of the most important principles of, right, swarming a problem. When we recognize it, we're bringing all the resources to bear on it, and we're going to right the ship as much as we can, as
Absolutely.
quickly as we can. Yeah, so that's super interesting. So going back to what you guys do look at when you're evaluating deals, obviously there's a financial review. There's also a market review. Um, what else are you guys looking at, or maybe how do you look at the financials? What are you looking to see? If there's a mid-market firm that's maybe family owned and they're looking to exit within the next 3 to 5 years, how could they position themselves to where they would be an attractive acquisition?
So I guess, first of all, we have chosen to invest between 3 million and 15 million in EBITDA. that is mostly because below 3 million, like the fixed cost of getting a deal done, the lawyers, their accountants, all that starts to become a really material part of the total cost of the transaction and really starts to hurt your returns. And then above around 15 million, you get above 250 employees. And we believe that it's one of our strengths is bringing great leadership to bear to these companies. A lot of times we are buying from a CEO who is the owner, and their motivation for selling is that over time they want to retire and they want to feel good about how that went. And so our ability to attract great leadership to their company is a selling point. But I would say in my career, like I managed at some points up to multiple thousand people. When you get above about 250, even a great leader is not going to know the name of everyone on the floor and not going to build kind of personal loyalty to them. So it's really important to us that when we bring in a leader, they can get their arms around that and literally get to know every single person in the company and build that kind of personal loyalty with them within the first, like 6 months that they're in the role. So that's kind of one aspect of what we're looking for. Another aspect I would say is the actual people. I mean, at the end of the day, it blows my mind that some private equity firms make an investment and then kind of bring in their executive team. It's hugely risky. They don't have the domain expertise and, the real knowledge of what made that company successful so far. And, what you're investing in when you buy or invest in a company is the people. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the people. There might be some intellectual property. Of course, there's some brand, but I think the vast value that you're investing in is the people. And so we look really hard at the leadership teams, and are they the type of people that we want to do business with? I mean, at the end of the day, life's too short, in my opinion, to be working with people you don't want to be working with and having fun doing it. And so how do you find great people that are doing things the right way and want to, treat people the right way and win the right way, in business? That's a big part of what we look for. We definitely want to look at a deal and feel like we are the best owner of that company going forward for whatever reason, whether that's how we jive with the leadership team or maybe some skills that we can bring that are going to help them to improve how they market, how they sell, how they manufacture. You alluded to this. I mean, if you're making an investment in a company where like everything's perfect, first of all, you're going to pay a really high price for that company because that's what everyone's looking for. And secondly, how do you really make a return for your investors? You know what I mean? At the end of the day, our view is the company ought to be more world-class when we sell them than they are when we bought them. And world-class can be an overused term, but doing things the right way. We generally actually improve benefits for the employees because we're really focused on retention and attracting the best people. And so, do you have really strong benefits for the employees and a culture? Are you giving people clear feedback at least once or twice a year on how they're performing and what they need to do to get promoted? Are you helping people to cross train so that they become more valuable to the company? We're huge believers in lean. And so we're doing value stream mapping exercises. We're doing Kaizen events. We're really looking at, within reason, what can you do over that 5 to 7 years that we expect to be, invested in that company so that when we end up exiting, we feel really good about it. Like that company is a much stronger company than when we got involved. The seller feels great about it. I've had sellers tell me, look, I was born and raised in this small town. I plan to retire here. I don't want someone coming up to me at church on Sunday and saying,
Right.
hey, how much did you make when you sold the company? Because they fired my cousin and, it's pretty terrible what happened. That seller wants to feel like my legacy that I created is being grown, not diminished. And I'm really proud of the way that's happening and the legacy that I leave. And if I go back to the company for a holiday party 5 years from now, I'm going to be really proud of
Right.
what's going on and how people are being treated.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. So this kind of leads me to my next question. When we're talking about that first 100 days, when you guys, take over an organization, what does that look like? Obviously, I would imagine it's a period of which I'm sure you've done a lot of this already, evaluation, assessment, trying to build relationships with a new leadership team, figuring out, what the future looks like with that leadership team. Kind of walk us through, you know, what are your next steps there?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it actually starts, like you mentioned, in the diligence process. Because we have that very tight team of three, that team of three people will be involved in the deal from literally the first day we pick it up until 7 years later, whatever, when we exit that deal. And so there's continuity of those relationships with the leadership team. During our diligence process, we will typically put together what we call as an operational agenda, being, let's look at everything we think could really move the needle and make this company stronger during our investment period. Some of that could be in the first 90 days. Some of that's going to be 3 years into it. But then before we close a deal, we will typically have identified that go forward leadership team. And a lot of times, like I said, that might mean that we're having to bring in a new CEO. Of course, that's not happening before close, but we've identified who's that person going to be. The seller has interviewed them and said, yeah, they feel like a really good cultural, fit. And then we will meet with that go forward leadership team and go over the operational agenda to say, hey, does this feel good to you? Is this, are we going down the right path here? We want that buy-in and it's really truly collaborative before we close. And then after we close, it's very much a teamwork, of partnering with that leadership team to execute on that plan. Now, of course, maybe once or twice a year, you're going to reevaluate. Is this still the highest priority? One thing I would say about a smaller company is there's generally very low inertia, what I mean by that is, like, it's easy to get things moving, but if you're a bad leader, it's also easy to like slow things down and
Yeah.
get things going in the wrong direction. In a bigger company, there's really high inertia. And if you're a great leader, sometimes it's harder to be recognized. And quite honestly, if you're a poor leader, you might be able to hide and not get caught out, not get seen. But in a small company, it's just not the case. You need leaders that are hands-on, that are attacking problems. And it's very important to be focused on like three things at once. If you go into a small company and you say, here's our 50-point plan and we execute this every time, you're just going to overwhelm that team and like nothing's going to get done. So we are very focused on what are the top three things. So for the first 90 days, what are the top three things? And by strategy, we do not have a 100-day plan. We don't have like, here's our playbook for LFM. We're going to execute this every time. It's very common. We're going to put an ERP system in. So there's a few things that are very common that we do, but there's no like defined, here's the plan, take it or leave it. That's very disempowering, I would say, to the leadership team. If you just say, here's our plan, you go execute it. So each plan is individualized for that company. And it's very much like three things at once. Like, let's go do these three things. Okay, we got them done. Great. Now let's do the next, highest important three things. Very focused, very much prioritizing what the leadership team is focused on. And I would say a big focus is on culture and leadership of, do we have the right leaders in place? Are they executing? One of my sayings is, do we have the right people on the bus? I've actually had CEOs lead me around, or owners and CEOs lead me around before we close and say, hey, this person's actually pretty terrible, but I didn't want to fire them, but you should actually
You should do it.
after we close. And we're not, big into letting go of people, but look, if you have to let go of someone, you got to do it. But making sure you have good people on the team people are in the right roles. Sometimes you look at a team and you go, wow, this person would be much better in this role. I don't know why they're in that role. Are they in the right roles? And then a big, get the bus headed in the right direction. Like, is it pursuing the right strategy? And then the last thing in my mind is like, get out of the way. Like, don't get run over by the bus. I think it's very common in private equity for a private equity firm to kind of parachute in their ops people, and they're like very active for the first 6 months, and all of a sudden they leave. And a lot of times you get a lot done, but then they leave and then it all kind of falls apart. I when I worked at Dell, I hated when people kind of from Austin flew into Nashville that really knew nothing about Nashville and tried to tell me like how to run my plant, and they just didn't really have the subject matter expertise to be giving that kind of advice. There were some that were great, but there were some that it felt like more like I'm from the IRS, I'm here to help. And so we always tell leadership teams, look, we want to kind of help educate you as to where we have experience, where we have skills, and then you pull us in when we can be valuable. We're not going to force ourselves on you. We're not going to be there all the time. There's not going to be anyone, unless things are going really badly, that like are on site all the time. It's just going to be, hey, could you help us? We're running a Kaizen event. We've never done that before. Can you guys be part of the first Kaizen event? Great. We'd love to do that. Or can you even lead the first Kaizen event? Sure. Can you help us? We're going to build a new plant. It's very common that when we invest in a company, we need to grow, and we just can't do that in the existing footprint. And so right now we're actually designing and building 2 new manufacturing plants for 2 new investments we've made. Very common. Like, hey, can you help us with that? Like, how do we lay out the plan? What's the best flow? Let's go do that together. But it's very collaborative, and it's what can you help us with? And then, mostly though, it's going to be that on-site leadership team leading it and taking charge.
Yeah, I mean, so I work a lot with small to mid-market manufacturers, and my background is automotive. I worked for Robert Bosch for a long time, which is a huge conglomerate. And, sometimes I'm talking about, well, these are some best practices that I've used in the past. And the feedback is like, well, hey, look, we're not Bosch. We're not an 80 billion euro a year company. And I always laugh. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? Bosch wishes they were you. Right?
Yeah.
Bosch sees that, you have the ability to adapt and to be agile and to make changes quick. When you talk about leadership, I think you're exactly right. You kind of alluded to it. In a big company, leaders can kind of hide because there's so much there's so many processes and structures that kind of keep the ship going, regardless of what you do. In a small company, but the other thing is they can't really make changes. In a small company, if you've got a good leader, I mean, you and I talked about it in the pre-meeting. He can take it to the moon. I mean, he can really have a huge impact. What are you looking for? How do you coach that, or do you hire for it, or do you coach it? Probably a blend of both. What's your view on leadership, and how do you get them going in the right direction? Having that huge impact.
I mean, I would say it's a little bit of both, coaching and hiring for it. One thing we look for is a leader that, first of all, has humility. One of my sayings is that arrogance is the enemy of leadership. And I think you have to have the humility to say, hey, I'm new to this company. I don't know anything. I need to first learn what made you successful, and the industry and the products and the people. So for the first like 6 months, I need to be like in a very much pure kind of learning mode, unless there's a crisis, or something that I have to address. But we look for leaders that can still be very comfortable on the shop floor and interact with people that are making $20 an hour or whatever, and also can be comfortable in a board meeting and putting the strategy together for the company. I used to play piano, and I use the analogy of you got to be able to play the high keys and the low keys, like the whole keyboard. And it's just very common that you find people in big companies that have gotten to a senior executive role, but they've forgotten like what it takes to put a spreadsheet together, or to lead a group of 20 people on the manufacturing floor. Our leaders are very hands-on, very much lead by example. If we need to clean this place up in 5S and paint the shop, I'm going to come in on Saturday and paint the shop. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to be there side by side with the team, rolling the paint up and making the place look better. We actually found in our first 5 years of operations that very few companies are actually training leaders to be cross-functional and to lead a small 250 person organization. And so we've started something called a CEO development program where we hire candidates typically out of business school, and we commit to them that over the first 5 to 7 years that they're working with LFM, we're going to be intensely kind of mentoring and coaching them, and they're going to get 3 very critical roles. One is a large leadership role. So generally that's going to be on the shop floor, leading a large team. I would call that kind of hierarchical leadership. But learning how do you lead people on the floor and lead a large team. Another role would be an individual contributor role, because it's important to know how to be an influential leader, not just using hierarchical skills, but how do I influence a peer? How do I influence, someone that doesn't report for me? Typically that role is something like a director of continuous improvement, where you have responsibility across all the functional areas to drive continuous improvement, but the people don't report to you. So you have to be really good at influencing. And then you have to have a customer facing leadership role. If you don't know how to talk to customers, how to sell the product, how to make pricing decisions, marketing decisions, new product design decisions. So that's going to be, literally carrying the bag, owning a P&L, doing a forecast every quarter, being held accountable, probably highly variable compensation, because that's how that works on that, in that part of the business. And then after those 3 roles, we think now you're ready to be CEO or a C-level in one of our companies. So it's a fantastic opportunity for someone to quickly get into a CEO level role. Negative, I would say, is you have to be willing to be fairly geographically flexible, because we're not going to be able to give you all of those roles in one company. You're probably going to have to move to 2 or even 3 companies over the first 7 years. That's the trade-off. But it's, I think, a great opportunity. It's been a very successful program. We have probably 30 or more students that'll apply for that, and only 2 that'll end up getting an opportunity. But something where we're basically grooming our own future CEOs.
I think that's what larger companies do, right? If I think back to my time at Bosch, they definitely had the management trainee program where they did exactly what you're talking about. They spent a year at the different facilities moving around. They might have a core focus, and then they had a cross-functional step. But yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. You've got to be able to see the whole picture. I was recently at an entrepreneur retreat, and we had our former CEO for a pretty large ice cream company was talking about some quality issues. That they had a big listeria outbreak, and it was a big deal, right? It cost them millions. They shut the lines down, and one of the and I'm the only manufacturing guy in the room. Everybody else is a tech guy, but I was really happy to hear him say one of the mistakes he felt like he made looking back at it was he didn't get involved on the shop floor enough early on. He didn't understand the risk that he was assuming, right? It was a very niche business, very artisan, right? And they didn't have barcodes. They had handwritten labels, and I kind of raised my hand. I was like, yeah, all that artisan stuff was real cool till it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
You don't, but he just didn't know, he that wasn't his background. So yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think too often you see the executive team, they become detached. They focus on the commercial side, maybe the sales side, but they lose sight of what's actually happening on the shop floor. So that's awesome to hear somebody at your level and your background say that, because yeah, I think it's a big problem for them in the mid-market levels.
Absolutely.
So moving on, you talked about operational excellence with limited resources, this is something that I've seen in my role as a consultant, is a lot of folks in the mid-market level, they really don't have a lot of continuous improvement, OpEx folks, right? I mean, they focus on making the widget, right? And they have people that are responsible for making the thing. Improving the process by which the thing is made is kind of secondary. It's not really a priority. How do you guys approach that? When you're coming into these companies, is it just reprioritizing things? Is it bringing in some additional capacity to help with that? How do you guys approach operational excellence with knowing that you don't have, an infinite budget?
It's definitely, I think it's very important to prioritize for sure, and just keep the leadership team very focused. I would actually say I think it's easier to implement lean at a small company than a bigger company, which is different than what I thought when I was at Dell, quite honestly. And the reason I would say that is lean is all about culture. And it's just much easier to change the culture of a smaller company than because of that inertia I talked about earlier. And I would say that you don't want to go down the lean path unless the CEO is really bought in. It's got to come from the very top. The CEO has to be passionate about it. But if in a small company where you're trying to optimize what you get out of a smaller number of resources, the underlying culture of lean is involve everyone. What a great philosophy for getting things done is to actually take advantage of the intellect and the abilities of every single member of your team, not just the salaried people.
Mm-hmm.
And so build those cross-functional teams and take advantage of people on the floor and all the expertise they have, and the knowledge that they have, and what a great thing as far as improving their job satisfaction, to be involved in driving improvement in their area of the company. And so I think lean is a great set of tools and a great philosophy for a smaller company because you're maximizing the use of the resources that you have available to you. And then I would also say, for sure, keeping to a very limited number of priorities. Just, you might have a list of 50 things you want to get done, but only do like 2 or 3 at a time
Pick
and
three.
get them done and then move on, get them done, move on. But yeah, I think, implementing lean, if it is driven from the top and something you're truly passionate about, is a great way to make improvements in a smaller company.
Let me run this by you. So, my core, our core offering at Allied Advisors is a fractional CI manager program. And with that, we're coming on site, doing the Kaizen events, helping them put together their roadmaps, their project day threes, and then leading the weekly, project day three review meetings, the roadmap meetings. What I've seen, or what I tell folks, and it sounds like you may disagree with this, so I'd love to get your thoughts. I think for continuous improvement and standard implementation to go well, you have to separate the concept from the execution. Meaning, if I put the concept development responsibility on the first shift supervisor, it's never going to be the priority for him. He's never going to say, hey, I'm not going to go worry about getting these parts out the door. I'm going to take the time to write this process standard, right? I'm going to document it. Because and the reason they don't do that, it's not that they can't or won't. It's because leadership shows day in and day out what they value from that associate. They value output. They value shipments, right? Revenue. They don't value the standardization piece of it. And I get that, right? I mean, I understand we got bills to pay. I always say we need to have somebody who's not tied to that day to day, who is responsible for at least putting the pen to paper. Now, obviously, this goes without saying, he or she needs to be out on the shop floor talking to those people, soliciting their feedback, getting their knowledge out of their head to put it onto that page. He or she doesn't need to do that in a vacuum, but but I think it's unfair to put that responsibility on people who are responsible for making the widget. What do you agree or disagree, or maybe what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think your model could be very effective. Number one, if the CEO is really bought in.
Well,
If the
that's a good
CEO
one.
is not
Test
really
that.
bought in, and they just say, well, we should hire this person and they're going to be really the one that drives it, that's not going to work. So much of lean, when you first start the lean journey, is culture, and that starts with training. And if you hire, uh, a consultant to come in and get that going, I think that's a great model. I think, assuming that the CEO is really bought in and it's not just the flavor of the day. And what I would say is, say you're on site, for 6 months. At the end of those 6 months, I would expect that the company would be much further kind of down its lean journey than when you started. But I would fully expect that the CEO would backfill you with a full-time person. Because if they don't, then to me it says, well, they thought they were going to be like 6 months transformation, and now they're happy with where things are. And now what's going to happen after you leave is, I think things are going to regress.
So
And I would say, to me, like, when you really get down the lean journey, the shop floor leaders have so defined their standard work that lean is part of their standard work, and they have basically created enough capacity where they can be a great partner to that kind of director of continuous improvement, or whatever the title is. And now the director of continuous improvement is more at the strategic level, kind of organizing these resources and making sure that the projects that the shop floor leaders are taking on fit into the value stream map that you have defined for the organization. And they're not having to be the one on the floor leading the Kaizen event. But that might be a year or two into the journey. But I would say, if you're there for, I don't know how long you're normally there, but 6 months, a year, whatever, and then you leave, and the CEO doesn't backfill with a full-time person, I think that's probably going to be a mistake.
yeah, that's actually one of the reasons we started the program. Is when I first started, we were doing just traditional consulting engagements, right? We would come on site for 6 months to a year, and we would do the projects, right? We implemented the Kanban pull systems, we wrote the standards, and then we left, and it always fell to pieces because there was nobody there to backfill. There was nobody that had skill set that understood it. And when I started looking into that, actually McKinsey, they did, and Deloitte, they did some research, and they found that 80% of all consultant-led projects are dead within 2 years. 40% are dead within 6 months. So we put, I put the program together because I thought, well, this is stupid on a stick, and and I hate it when things fall to pieces.
Yeah.
Like, it bothers me personally. So, we put the program together because, look, I want to teach a man to fish. I want to train the organization on how to do this. I want you to learn how to do this. And then after a year, you're doing it, right? You're carrying this momentum into the future. It's become a part of who you are. It's become a part of the culture. So yeah, I 100% agree. It's got to be CEO led. It can't be a side project. It's got to really be viewed as, this is who I am. This is who the organization is. This is how we operate. If you look at it as a side project, it's just a waste of time and money. And then, to your point, you got to have somebody that's going to take the reins and really run it into the future. So that's, yeah, I think, we're maybe a little bit more closely aligned than what I thought there at first. Well, Steve, again, thank you so much for carving out the time. Obviously, you have such an impressive background, and are teaching some of the nation's brightest manufacturing minds. So thank you for taking an hour to come talk manufacturing with us. Would love to follow up with you down the road and see how things are going, and see if there's other things that are changing, and maybe different opportunities out there that our audience might benefit from. But yeah, thank you so much for carving out the time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a pleasure to spend the time together, and happy to talk again in the future.
Absolutely. And folks, if you guys enjoyed this conversation with Steve, please leave us a 5-star review, like and subscribe. It really does help us get the message out to more folks so that others can learn from the experts like Steve that we try to have on the show to share their knowledge with you guys. Also, if you are in a mid-market manufacturer looking to implement that culture defining program, we'd love to talk to you about our fractional CI manager program. Obviously, we really feel like it does add value. And if that's something that you think you would benefit from, reach out to us on LinkedIn or email at info@alliedgroup.io. And look forward to it. So again, thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thank you.